In specialty healthcare, growth is not optional, but scaling with operational excellence, that's the hard part. I'm Joe Zboch. This is Scaling Specialty Growth. Thanks for listening. Today's guest is Olivia Wolf, a healthcare executive and consultant. She's a longtime practice administrator who got her start in healthcare at the age of 14, posting charges in a hospital billing department. Olivia has spent her career in orthopedic practice management, served on the board of directors for AOE. She's also a certified professional coder, holds an MBA from Creighton, and hosts her own leadership podcast called The Stuckest Podcast. She's one of the operators who's equally comfortable in the weeds of revenue cycle management and in the bigger conversation about culture, leadership, and what it takes to actually build a practice that runs well. Olivia, welcome. Thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I'm happy to be here.
I'm really excited to dive into what you've been learning, what you've been uncovering, and what your viewpoints are on culture as it relates to the orthopedic practice. Draw some lines for me about how maybe it hasn't been the focal point that it really needs to be.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate the question. It's, you mentioned I've been in healthcare since I was 14 years old, started out at a hospital. Along, the whole of my healthcare leadership journey, a lot of my own focus was just operational, heavy into the technical skills, getting the job done. Relationships were formed. The gals that I grew up with in revenue cycle at an internal medicine practice when I first moved to Alaska, still some of my closest friends were all in healthcare. But really, the relationships and the work of it were pretty siloed for me in my own mind, in my own mental model. And so as I matured as a leader, really bringing those things together holistically and integrating both what I would call the technical skills and the soft skills of leadership and operations is really where I've discovered a passion. That passion has found a lot of its exercise in things around physician burnout, just workforce development, those kind of things. And I love orthopedics. If I said yesterday to somebody that if it was possible to fall in love with a subspecialty, orthopedics would be it. And part of the reason that I love it is the way that we talk about body and body mechanics in orthopedics. It can be very holistic. And one of the things that I've adopted in my language around the importance of focusing on leadership, not management is operational, leadership is a mental model, it's an art, it's a lifestyle, is that some of the soft skills when we talk about communication, and I don't mean email, I mean having hard conversations, those are all the synovial fluid in between our joints that we need to function properly. And what I'm finding in a lot of organizations is that we're bone on bone. Technical skills have taken the front seat, and they matter. I'm not saying that technical skills don't matter. They matter to patient outcomes. They matter to quality. And there's a relational and soft skills element that really needs to be developed in leaders to make sure that the culture is creating a place where people can thrive in the operations. Using medical language again, culture is where things go to live or die. We know that in the lab. That's well known in medicine. So starting to talk in clinical language about leadership philosophy, I have just discovered a passion for that and finding that a lot of practices are, especially post-COVID, there's the larger cultural issue also. A lot of trust has been lost after COVID in relationship to healthcare providers, clinicians, physicians. I think that's why we're seeing a lot of increased violence towards people in the care industry. So it's a big, heavy seat to sit in or pool to swim in, if you will. But it's really important, I think more important now, more than ever, to help regain that public trust. And then the trust inside the practices to continue to deliver care to patients in a high quality manner.
So you've already given a lot to chew on. Clearly, this work is important to you and important in general, and you've brought up a lot of good points. Walk me through maybe some of the early warning signs that the practice body maybe exhibits before that an operations leader listening to this, that a growth leader listening to this can kind of diagnose before there's a fracture, right? Before that bone on bone reaches that breaking point to use, hopefully some of that language that you've adopted.
Yeah, sure. Where I think practices start to see it are in staff productivity, staff engagement, turnover, retention, or the lack thereof. What I would say to practice leaders, though, is those are the symptoms that have been boiling for a really long time. And that's where they show up visually or vocally. Where it shows up, and this would be on leadership to develop just a different kind of relationship with their staff and develop the skill to, what I would say, be able to hear the unheard. So, Sunday scaries. How many of your staff are dreading setting their alarm and setting out their clothes to come to work the next day? They're not going to tell you that. They're going to come to work, maybe be 5 to 7 minutes late, maybe later than that, maybe start calling in sick a lot. And so as leaders, it's important to develop a skill to listen for the things that aren't really loud, because it starts way before then. I've been in that position myself. When we talk about burnout, like in the physician space, a lot of the conversation has been, well, med schools are putting caps on hours worked now. That's important. The human body is capable of only so much. At the same time, we discount the role of purpose in the workforce. And I can speak for myself, and I've seen it with others. I have worked a 20-hour job that had no purpose, and I felt like I was dying. You give me a job, I could purpose behind that job, I can easily go above and beyond. And healthcare attracts people who are caregivers, and I think at a baseline willing to go above and beyond. And so when that above and beyond stops, I think we've lost purpose. It's not, and I think some of the purpose is in the mechanics of it. For example, credentialing. I've been doing credentialing recently for a client. Loathe it. The system is so purposely complicated. There's some centralized things like CAQH where a provider goes in and puts in all their information and other payers look at it, but still separate enrollments for every single insurance company. All of the disclosure questions about licensure and all that stuff are slightly different. So there's no standardization in that. And so to even get a provider paid, the hoops that you have to jump through for healthy revenue to come in to show on the back end, on the revenue end, the work that they're putting in on the front end, because it's a lot of work on the front end. And so it does show up. And that's incredibly frustrating for me to do credentialing in those weeds again. I haven't been in those weeds in quite a while, but it's a reminder that, operational systems do lend to that because it's very monotonous and boring. Like, why am I doing this? Why am I answering the same questions over and over again when they're all in this one place? And so there is an operational component. And I think that's a misunderstanding at large as well, that kind of the operational technical skills and soft skills are separate, and they're not. They really do work together. So there is the operational element that drives lack of purpose. Those things you can't control though, but there are a lot that leaders can control as far as purpose, like why it matters that the front desk collects a copay correctly, or why it matters that revenue cycle gets the authorization ahead of time. And we talk a lot about, we know financially why that's important, but from the patient perspective, they're in pain. They want answers. The more that we can do for them to make their experience with our practices mostly about the care and getting them to the healthy place that they want to be, and not have to worry about the authorization, not have to worry about the bill, that matters. And so those are the kind of purposes that I think we fail to talk about sometimes because we're so focused on the health of the practice itself, but it's all connected.
So you mentioned the Sunday scaries, you mentioned listening for, how to hear the unheard in some of the symptoms and lower staff productivity. So do you find in the conversations and the work that you do with practice leaders that is the source of that like an over focus on the numbers or the operational aspects of the role? Is that one of many sources? What are the underlying or the fundamental sources that you've uncovered in your work that result in this sort of unhealthy culture at the staff level? And then what does the work to begin to correct that look like? Is it leaders
Sure.
bringing that to the surface? Is there some sort of framework for acknowledging that how things have been run or what has been communicated verbally or inverbally, so to speak, in the posture of the practice?
Sure.
Do leaders go first? Is the COO expected to come to work and say, "Man, y'all, I wasn't excited to come into work today, but you know what? I put my head down because I love patients." That's a little glib, I think might be the word, but hopefully
Sure.
you can see the feel that I'm going for here, because this is a soft skill, right? But I feel like in the work that you've done, you found ways to harden it, or at least make it more intentional. This kind of
Sure.
like culture healing type process.
Yeah, I think it's a multitude of things. I think particularly for small practices, and having been in a small practice myself as an administrator, there's just a lot of work to do. And so it's really easy to get stuck behind your desk, get stuck in your email inbox, and do the things that give us dopamine and also feel like we're doing a good job, which is to complete our task list. If you're not getting out and listening to your staff, and I'll give you an example. I was in an organization for a while that really focused on the relational element of leaders and staff. And what that looked like was either weekly or biweekly check-ins, full hour. What are you up to? And it included, things like, hey, I heard you had to take your dog to the vet. Is she okay? And really getting to know those people as people. What that developed is then, 6 months later, when this person was going through a really hard time, I could tell the way they were speaking in group meetings that something was not okay. Minor tone shift, less bandwidth, more easily irritated, those kind of things. That allowed me to pull them aside and say, hey, I noticed you're not showing up the same way that you usually do. Or I noticed that you're really struggling to be here on time, and that's not like you. Can you help me understand what's going on? And that takes listening to and getting to know your people. And we don't provide a lot of time and space for that. And that leads to the bigger conversation, which is, I think we've done a disservice in this country approaching healthcare as a business. We focus too much on the productivity. And not that it doesn't matter. I'm not advocating for the pendulum swing to go the other way into full anarchy where productivity doesn't matter. But I think in the mental, standard market logic model, healthcare just doesn't work. We run practices and people like machines, and they aren't. And I think that was a fracture that was there for a really long time, and COVID finally broke it. And so workforce has been a challenge ever since. And it was a challenge before, and physician burnout was an issue before, and that greatly compounded it. So there's just far larger implications to the way that we run healthcare in this country that lend to the dehumanization of the model. So that's also a very heavy, big thing to bite off and chew and to contemplate, but it really does trickle down into the everyday. And so back to your point, finding time to get out of your inbox and make rounds, go talk to your people, just observe what they're doing. And I'm not talking about in the, micromanaging, I'm auditing your work way. I'm talking about getting out into the microcosm, the ecosystem of your healthcare practice, and just observing. Is the doctor continually frustrated about how many clicks in the EHR when there's actually something in the EHR configuration that could make it 2 clicks and it would make them feel better that they're not? Because you're going to see the frustration, right? What's really bothering them could be totally different. They're probably going to yell about the clicks. What's underneath that is the time of their life that they have dedicated to this profession. And now they're in the hallway trying to get their EHR to work and not in the room with the patient, which is and so when we talk about purpose, the purpose is taken away when we're taken away from the patient into all these bogged down heavy, that in the tech world, love it. It's flashy, it's new, it's shiny. Let's do it. Let's, move fast and break stuff, which I loathe. I don't think it's healthy in the tech bro sphere, and it's made its way into healthcare, and I don't like that either. But just learning to listen for all of those undercurrents instead of the thing that's in front of you, because the thing that's in front of you is going to be very loud, and it's rarely the actual problem. Can I share another story around that?
Yeah. I have a follow-up question or two. Yeah.
Yeah. Dealing with an orthopedic surgeon who, ended up in my office loud and brash and upset, made it about the cast that came off too early, and x-ray didn't catch that they weren't supposed to take the cast off before they did the x-rays, so the kid's fracture fell out. Took the time, and it was a good probably 90 minutes to talk with this physician about what was actually going on. And the bottom line undercurrent was a great sense of shame about appearing incompetent before in front of this child's family. And it was, once we got down to the operations of it, it was part his responsibility, part the x-ray tech's responsibility. In his note prior to this visit, he did not specify x-ray in cast. That was his job. It was in our policies and procedures that the provider specified so that the x-ray tech could go back to the last note and get their instruction. He didn't do it. Part the x-ray tech, because the x-ray tech, when he looked at the note and didn't see it there, should have gone and double checked and asked, and they didn't. So it was a multi-system, multi-personnel failure. But the thing that caused him to come into my office and absolutely flip out was a sense of shame, incompetence. He'd been through how many years of school, fellowships in his board period. And so those are the undercurrents that leaders need to start listening to, and then developing the skill on how to handle that. I was fortunate to have developed some skills at that time and had to have the, awkward conversation of I know what shame spirals feel like. They suck. I get it. I'm actually with you. And shame does not give you the right to behave however you want, whenever you want, to whomever you want. You don't get to scream at me like that. And this is part of my doctorate work and research. Nobody's prepared for this. We're only prepared for our technical skills. They are only prepared for their clinical technical skills. My cohort are only prepared for the business technical skills. And yet the relationship in the burnout research has been proven to be one of the key drivers of their burnout, which then, you've got an angry, upset, distressed physician. Everybody feels it. So again, that's a lot of words to say as practice leaders, developing that skill to listen to the undercurrent and to the heartbeat and not the symptom that's really loud and in your face, because it's also really distracting, and where we spend a lot of our time trying to fix it then.
Right. And addressing the symptom, not the root cause. Mm-hmm. So I want to get your take on, for the guests we've had on this show, the listeners of this show, a lot of them are at independent practices that very much have a sort of growth imperative with the market, the competitive pressures around them. And many of the questions and conversations that I've had around how do you maintain that kind of operational excellence while also supporting the systems for growth. And your point of view, you're kind of like the philosophy or what you take of these practices is very much that you have to develop the skill set to listen deeply, to listen to one or two layers underneath, and to be willing to do uncomfortable work. And I think there's an interesting relation. There's a nice bridge there, Venn diagram or whatever you want to call it, with uncomfortable work from a relational level, and then uncomfortable work in terms of growth. Growth hurts. Don't I know it? Many nights recently upstairs with my son, Remy, because his legs hurt, right? Yeah. And so my question is, in these seasons that these operations leaders are going through, they're going to be feeling the pressure to grow. And I've learned in these conversations some great perspectives. Amy C. Hafer at OSMS, she likes to frame this perspective as growth as a game that she and her staff are playing together. Obviously, Dr. Matthew Slater has invested a lot in the team, and his retention rates are very good. I could go on, but I'd like to get your take on the foundational perspective that you feel is required for healthy growth or regrowth.
Pruning, which also doesn't go in line with the standard market logic where growth is always up and out and more. In addition to looking at the wisdom of our bodies, I tend to look at the wisdom of nature. You want really good crops, there's a pruning period. There's also a period, you want to get super philosophical and biblical about it. Once every 7 years, you're not supposed to grow on a certain piece of property. The land needs time to rest. And so we don't build in rest. We don't build in pruning. A number of practices that I've worked with in the last several years, their outward infrastructure, so that's recruitment of physicians, all the things that make all the charges and the revenue on the front side appear to go up, not turning inward and paying attention to their roots at all, any kind of storm comes, that tree is going to fall over. You have to pay attention to your root infrastructure. And so I have given recommendations to practice. Stop your recruiting, bulk up your revenue cycle, invest in your team, stabilize your operations. And so we don't, again, and this is my other like pet peeve, I have stopped calling healthcare an industry. That is incredibly destructive language. We are a humanities profession. This is a profession. It's a calling. It's not an industry. We have industrialized it, and that's why it's become so inhumane. But we're not dealing with, car parts on the assembly line at Ford. But that's how we treat it, at least in the business office. That's how we treat it. And I think that's a lot of I know from the research, that's a big part of the problem in the relationship between physicians and administrators or executives writ large. They're largely still in it for the humanities. We're treating it like a business model. And so I don't think that practices give enough attention to the time when pruning is supposed to happen. And that doesn't mean you stop or you stop investing resources. You just turn them inward into your roots, because it doesn't matter that you recruit 5 more orthopedic physicians to your practice. If you're not beefing up your rev cycle and all of your support infrastructure as you do that, you're going to find yourself way extended. You're going to find yourself over your skis, kiddo, right? So, and we see that happening. And so then the pressure, and this is where it gets really interesting, the pressure to correct that from a place of the panic that you're feeling is to just keep doing more and more outward. If we just get one more, physician, maybe we can get the revenue to bulk up our revenue cycle. No, you got to stop and learn to make decisions from a place of importance, but not anxiety. And there's a lot of anxiety in the healthcare system, the pressure creates that anxiety. So it's by design. So it feels very counterintuitive to turn inward. And, recruitment budgets are big. I don't know that physician leaders, I don't know that they know how big those budgets can be. That's readily available money. Stop sending it outward to recruit. Turn it inward. Train your staff. If you've got a really, diamond in the rough who would benefit maybe from an extra certification, invest in that. And then fix the culture to keep that person there. I hear from practices sometimes, well, I don't want to invest another credential in my staff. They could leave me and take it elsewhere. Why would they leave you? And that's the uncomfortable conversation. What about your culture makes it appealing to leave? Because you can fix that. So just very different conversations. And it is uncomfortable to say, like, there's a time to prune, cut back. Not all growth is visible. We know that in nature. We know that in our bodies. Why don't we understand that in business? Is the question that I would ask.
Taking the time and resource for more inward facing growth. And that's uncomfortable work. That's going first. That's listening deeply. That's hearing the unheard. Liv, thank you so much for your time on the podcast today. I really appreciate your perspective.
Yeah, happy to bring it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, it's Joe. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, share with a peer. And if you're looking to scale referral operations to drive growth and efficiency, visit hatchcare.com.